Believe it or not, this is the last video of the whole entire textbook. We are going to combine the last two sections, 16.3 and 16.4, into one video because 16.4 is super fast, just like 16.1 was. But first, before we get there, 16.3 is going to cover the learning objectives 2 and 3 from your chapter. That means we're going to identify and describe the content of each section of an APA style research report. And by the end of all this, you should be able to write a report using APA style. Which you have already turned in. So I really hope that you guys used this chapter as a resource. I had mentioned in one of the previous videos earlier in the term that chapter 16 was a good resource. It is also in your syllabus and possibly even in one of the content folders. I can't remember, but I hope that you guys aren't looking at this information this week going, oh, this would have been nice to know before I turned in my research proposal. Because even though this is talking about a research report, the elements of this is very, very similar to a research proposal, which we will talk about later. Towards the end of this video, they actually do mention research proposals, but and you will see this, they're very similar. But let's get right into this. And also my daughter is homesick, so if you hear her in the background, that's what that's about. All right, so we have our title page is the first element of the APA style research report. And again, to review, a research report means you have conducted a study of your own, whether it's an experiment or some kind of study. You have collected data, you have analyzed that data, you've done all those things. And so now we are going to write up a report that summarizes everything. So first we start with the title page. And you're going to have what is called a running head along the top. The actual words running head are on the title page itself, but on the rest of the paper, it's just the running head itself. The contents of those are the words of the running head. It's not the actual words running head, which you'll see an example of that in a second. And then of course the page number 1 up in the right hand corner. This is basically, in case you guys are like, what in the world is a running head, or why are we using a running head? It's identifying the paper for the readers. It's at the top of every page, so that if they were to, leave and come back to it, or if they actually print off the pages and they get, mixed up with something else, like it helps remind you the topic, the keywords related to what they're reading about, and helps identify your specific research report. So then usually it's like somewhere in the middle, but it can vary. There's not it's not a huge difference where it is, but you will have the title of the paper, you will have the author name, which is usually you, or and then others, if there was others that helped you. There's no by or word like that or anything. It's just your name. And then any affiliations like the university that you're with or whatever that may be. And then some title pages will also include an author note. And your book goes into more detail about what's included and all of that. As far as the title of the paper goes, your book reminds you, and I would remind you as well, that for titles of research reports, the first word should not really be, you want meaningful words in your title, right? And you want to get right to the point. And so the first word or words of your title should be what your main topic is, so that right away the reader knows that's what this is about. That's good for a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons is when people are searching, as you know, when you're searching through the literature to find research that supports what you're looking into or your topic, Titles is the first way that you weed studies out. And so if the study doesn't have it in the first few words of what it's about, the main topic, it could likely never really get used by other researchers, even though you have, very valuable information to provide on that topic, again, in theory. And so you want to make sure that you're getting right to the point. So if you're, I think your book uses the example of gender studies. If the title of your, if the topic of your um, paper is gender studies, then start the title with gender studies. You could say gender studies and the related topics, or gender studies and whatever other variable you studied, um, things like that. Okay, so the example in your book here of a title page is figure 16.1. You see the running head, you see the lowercase h in running head, you see that the running head itself is always all capital letters, and that it's a few of the keywords from the title. It has to be less than 50 characters. That includes spaces. So it needs to be, it's shorter than your title. It's a condensed version of your title. It's not just repeating the title. And then you have the title, the author, and the affiliation. That's all centered. You see the author note and the example of the paragraphs that go under author notes if you choose to include that. And then the next page, page 2, is the abstract. So here we have the elements of an abstract. So the abstract is basically a summary of your paper. It is typically 150 to 250 words. It is usually written last, even though it comes second in the order of things in your research report. It is usually written at the very end because it's easier to write that abstract once you have completed writing everything else, because again, it's a summary of everything that you're going to say in the research report. It's arguably one of the most important parts of your research report. Again, because of it's a preview, it is part of that weeding out process that we went through when we looked at our literature review and we were trying to find, when researchers are looking for research to support their ideas in their paper, and their research and their studies. Title is one of the ways that they, look for articles, but abstract is another way. And so you want to make sure that it is written well, that it's a good summary, and that it, clearly and simply states what your study is about, so that people can know if it applies to their own research or their own ideas. So that includes a one-sentence statement of the problem or research question, a very brief description of the participants, a very brief description of the method and procedures, again, brief report of the results, and a statement about the conclusions or implications from the study. So the example here, this is something that's just better to see, is right here in figure 16.2 from your book. Again, you see that running head and page number at the top. Notice the words running head are gone. So it's going to be like that throughout the rest of your paper. The word abstract is centered, not bolded. This is the only time you will not indent a paragraph in this paper, is for this abstract. It is just sort of a block paragraph. And you see they point out if you read through there, you can see where they point out where they stated the problem, where they described the participants, where they described the method, where they reported the results and the conclusion or implications. And you can see it's all very simplified, condensed, but clear. It covers everything that is going to be covered in your research report. So next, on page 3, starts your introduction. It It's usually a few pages long, but that can vary wildly depending on, what kind of research you're doing and how much background information you need to provide on the topic. But generally, you're introducing the topic, you're reviewing the relevant literature, and along with that, you are explaining how you arrived at your research question from this previous research that you provided, and you're showing how this research is providing a rationale for your specific study and your specific hypothesis. That's what you're leading to the whole way. So you review that relevant literature, and then that leads to you, with the lens of we're leading up to what the problem is that we're going to address in this study. And so all of that literature is pointing towards that throughout the introduction, and then towards the end will be that statement of the problem or purpose of your study with the relevant variables again clearly defined. And you're going to say, in light of all of this research, here's the problem, or here's what we're going to do about it. And then at the very end is going to be a very brief description of the research strategy that you used, and what you to evaluate your hypothesis. Yeah, and again, what your hypothesis was, of course. But again, you should be doing that throughout the introduction, showing how this previous research provided background knowledge and background information, not just for what you were going to do, but what your predictions were as well, and how you obtained the answer to the question. And so the goal here is, but at the end of the introduction, the reader should finish with a very clear understanding of what the problem or research question was, the rationale that led you there, and a basic understanding of how you answered that problem. Again, very basic. You get into more details of all of that later in the other sections, but this is just to give them a very a brief, idea of where you're headed. The main point of the introduction is that literature review and that support for your ideas. Here are little pieces of the introduction to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. The running head and page number, again, page 3. The centered title, not bolded. The general introduction starts, again, indenting those paragraphs. Then down here, they're talking about all the relevant literature and how it supports, and they have the appropriate citations there. And then they quickly, few sentences, address the method they used and what their hypothesis was. That flows into the method section of the paper. And this does not start on a new page like everything else we talked about so far. It literally just flows after the introduction. You just put a heading that says method, and we roll right along. It again is a detailed description of how exactly your variables were defined and how they were measured, how you got your data, the procedures you went through, all of that, what actually happened as far as the procedures and the data collection goes. The main reason for this section is for readers to determine the adequacy of your study and your research and what you did, and also to be able to duplicate it if they want to, or expand on it if they want to in their own research. And so in order to do that, it has to be very detailed so they know exactly what you did. And so there are some subsections often to the method section. One of those is subjects or participants. Again, subjects for animals, participants for humans. And that includes the number of participants, the eligibility or exclusion criteria. So we couldn't include these people because of these variables, or they would only qualify for the study if they had this, and this. The demographics of your participants. So basic demographic information like gender, age, um, ethnicity, or a lot of times they'll, depending on the um, relevant characteristics to your study and variables that are worth looking at in relationship to your study, there may be other things like socioeconomic status or, where they live, the region, or area that they live, or, um, you know, average income level, occupation. And it could be even things like hair color, eye color. Again, it just depends on what you are studying and what variables you're looking at. Um, but that section is all about the subjects or the participants. As much information as you can provide about them as possible. Then the procedure subsection is about the procedure. Obviously, this is where you talk about the selection procedure, like how you found those participants and how you selected them, that process. The settings and locations where you collected your data. If you paid or gave any incentives to your participants, what those were, and how that all went down. The ethical standards or safety monitoring. So here's how we met the ethical standards, or here's the ways that we kept our participants safe during our study. And then how you divided or assigned those participants to groups and how many participants there were in each group, whether you divided them up yourself or you based on some other variable, or you assigned them because there was some sort of manipulation. The description of the instructions that were given to the participants, exactly what they experienced, your research design and strategy as far as is it a between subjects design or within subjects design? Is it experimental? Is it correlational? Whatever, the description of your research design. And then, of course, if there was experimental manipulation or intervention, what that looked like, how that worked. And then as a part of that, possibly you might need to discuss any apparatus or materials that were used. And you see sometimes those can be their own subsections if they are specifically, if they're very detailed, if there's a lot of apparatus or materials to discuss, then they may need their own subsection. And so that would include things like the operational definition of the variables, especially if it's a complicated way, like how you defined and measured the variables using a questionnaire or physiological measures, blood pressure, whatever. The apparatus that was used for that, or the materials like questionnaires that were used for that, and what those meant, and also what scores on those things meant, and then also evidence of reliability and validity of that apparatus or those materials, because especially if it's been well established, say that, explain that. But if it's something that you created yourself, then you need to try to support your use of your own unique material or apparatus. Again, apparatus is usually a piece of equipment, a physical thing, and then materials is usually like questionnaires and surveys and things like that. So the method section, here's the example from figure 16.4 in your book. Notice that I was getting ready to read the running head. The running head is there. There's your page number. Notice that this is on page 6. So that means that pages 3, 4, and 5 was their introduction. I don't like that they started this at the beginning of the page because it makes it look like it has to be a new page. Again, it's not a new page. So that word method, that heading, that could be, there should be right above that a line that says, that's the last line of the introduction, right? It does not start a new page. This was probably just a coincidence, but just so you are aware. And then you see a subsection is not centered. It is left aligned, but it is still bolded. There's participants subsection. Here's where they describe all of the participants or subjects. And then you see the procedure subsection heading, and they describe the materials and the process that they went through to conduct that. And that is not all. Like, there is more to it, I'm sure, because the procedure section is usually a lot longer than that, because again, you want it to be as detailed as possible, but that's just giving you a brief look at that to give you an idea of what that looks like. And then the next element is the results section. So again, this is a summary of the data and the statistical analyses that were used. Again, it begins right after the method section. It's not on a new page. And it provides that complete and unbiased report of the findings. So it's just the facts. There's no discussion. Remember, that's a separate section. It's just the facts of the findings. The way that usually flows is they start with the primary outcome, the primary result that was found, and then they go into the basic descriptive statistics, and then they go into the more specific inferential statistics, and then they go into the effect size, discussing the size of the effect, or the findings that were found. That's redundant, findings that were found, but you know what I'm saying. And then a reminder that figures and tables are at the end of the document. They're not in the body of the paper themselves. You would just refer to table 1 in parentheses, and you would provide that table at the very end of the document on its own separate page, not within the actual body of the paper itself. And then usually when you're stating results or findings, it usually involves the type of test, the degrees of freedom, the specific outcome of that finding or that statistic, the level of significance, and then the size and direction of the effect of that. So again, here is your example of the results section from figure 16.5. And this actually shows you a great example of results, and then you see discussion at the bottom. So you see how they just flow together. That's how the whole paper should be from introduction until the end of the body of the text. It just all flows. You don't start a new page for the method or results or discussion sections. Again, you see that they provide descriptive statistics. You see that they provide inferential statistics and effect size. And then again, because they had, more statistics to report for either another group or whatever the case may be, they provided descriptive statistics again, and then inferential statistics and effect size for that as well. But you see, they're just stating the results, right? There's not a interpretation or discussion of it, because next is where you create your own discussion section where you do that. So usually a discussion section restates the hypothesis, summarizes the results in words instead of just stating the data, and then presents a discussion of, you're interpreting it, you're talking about any implications or possible applications, any limitations, all of those things. And again, it does not start a new page. This process leads to step 10, where in the research process that we talked about way at the beginning, where you are then able to tweak it, modify it for more research, or others are able to duplicate it and use it for more research. Because remember, it is a cycle process. It's never ending. It's not, I'm done, move on. Science is ever growing and ever changing. The discussion section itself should, in general, be a mirror image of your introduction. So remember, in your introduction section, you were providing all of this literature, and you were leading us as the reader down to your problem and your hypothesis. You're pointing towards that the whole time. We're leading up to that until we get to that point. This is like the flip side of that. This is the mirror image of that. So you for a discussion section, you are starting with the hypothesis, and then you are providing these results and showing how that supported or did not support your hypothesis. And then you're bringing it back to that previous research. You're tying in that previous research from the intro as you go along to show how what you found relates to previous research, and how that can be used um, to interpret or for implications or for applications and all of those things. So again, we're always in the beginning, you're in the introduction, you're relating that research to your hypothesis and what you're going to study. In the discussion, you're relating your results back to that research that you talked about at the beginning. Okay, and so the example of a discussion section is here in figure 16.6. You see how there's the end of the results section, so there's no new page. I like that they showed that. I wish they had done that on the other examples as well. There's the discussion heading. There's where they're relating it to other research, and again, citing that research. There's implications, there's ideas for future research, etc. And again, discussion sections are a lot longer than this. This is just a little excerpt that is not the whole discussion section. And then once you are done with your paper or your report, then you have to have a references page. Again, that starts a new page. This time we actually do start a new page. And you're listing all of the references, all of the sources that you cited in your report. It should not include sources that you didn't cite. If you did not cite it, it should not be there. If you feel like you need to include it for some reason, then it probably should have been cited in your paper. If you feel like that this article is important because it relates to what I am talking about, or it helps support my research idea or my hypothesis, then you should have cited that in that section of your paper. Go back and put that citation in, and then you can include that in your references list. As far as the format of it, it needs to be organized alphabetically by the last name of the first author. So let's say the first author for one of the studies, the last name is Smith. And then there's other authors as well, but Smith is the first one listed. And then for another source, it's Baker is the last name, and there's other authors, but Baker's the first one listed. The Baker source or reference listing would be above the Smith, because again, we're going in alphabetical order. B comes before S. You're not listing them in the order that they were cited. A lot of students get confused on that. It is alphabetical order by the last name. And the recommendation is that you include the digital object identifier, or the DOI. It looks like kind of like a hyperlink almost. It's a bunch of numbers. Most include that now, and most of you have been including those in your references, which is great. But you may need to make sure that you have all the other information as well. And so here's an example of a reference page. You see the running head is still there. You see that this is page 9, which means that pages 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were their introduction section, method section, result section, and discussion section. So now the paper's over, and so we're starting on page 9. We're doing the references. Centered heading, not bolded. And then you see there, Beck, and then, oh my goodness, I can't pronounce that name, but it starts with a C. And then Kennard and Richards, you see that the B, C, K, R, S, they're in alphabetical order, right? Then you see how the basic format, there is the authors, the year, the title of the book or the article. If it is an article, then after that, you have to have the title of the journal that it came from, the volume number or issue number, and then you have your page numbers after that. If it's a book, you may have publisher as well, and then you can see the DOI for several of those as well. Let me see. I think that's it. You notice it's double spaced just like everything else. And then that's the tables and figures. So I wanted to show you really quickly table 16.2 in your book. I said 16.2. I lied. It's 16.3. Oh, no, no, no. I did want to go to 16.2. Guys, I'm losing my mind. I've been staying up with my daughter too long. Table 16.2 is showing you these common reference formats and examples. So here's a journal article, and that example there is how you would format your reference as far as what information is included, how the journal title, or I mean, the journal article title is not italicized, but the journal itself is italicized along with the volume number, 64 there. And then the page number is 719 through 730. Notice there's not a P or a V or anything in front of the volume or the page number. It's just the numbers and the DOI there. Here's what it looks like when there's not a DOI. You can just say retrieved from, and the more information you can provide, the better. But if you don't include that, that's okay too. If it just ended at the page numbers, that would be okay too. But you do want to try to include as much information as possible so that people can find the things you're referencing. And so there's an example. That Miller example is without a DOI or a retrieved from link. Then if it's an entire book, not just a journal article, then that's what that looks like. And then for a book chapter, if that's all you're referencing, then that's what that looks like down there at the bottom there. Of course, there is a lot more information at apastyle.org for that, but that just gives you a kind of an example for the basic types of sources. For tables and figures, again, I talked about this, that they go at the end as a general rule. They are supplementing the text. They're not duplicating information that's already been presented in text form. So if you already talked about something in text form, like you explained and you presented the numbers and everything already in text form, you don't need a table as well. But if it makes more sense to present it in table form, if it's easier to understand and conceptually to see in a figure, a graph, or a table, then you can reference it. You don't have to provide that information in the body of your text. You can reference it and say, you in table 1, you will be able to see that this occurred. And that's it. You don't have to go into detail, because the table itself will go into the detail, and that will be on a separate page. Any table or figure should be mentioned by a number. So you start with 1. If you have 2 tables, then there will be table 1, table 2. If you have 3 figures, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, etc. And that's just the order in which you mention them is how you would number them. And that's the order in which they should be put at the end of your report. Again, the text should point out some of the more important aspects of the figure or table, but the table and figure should be able to stand alone. And each table or figure is on a new page at the end. And so an appendix is similar, but those are identified by letters. Take your drink, baby. Get your drink. Instead of numbers. So we said table 1, table 2, figure 1, figure 2. Appendix is by letter. So it's appendix A, appendix B, appendix C. And this is when you have a lot of detailed information that you need to give about something that you don't want to put in the body of your paper, because the body of your paper should flow well. And if you put all of that information in the middle of your paper, it would derail your point and what you were talking about. It would interrupt the flow of your paper. And so, the points that you were trying to make in your paper. And so that's why appendices are created and put at the end of papers sometimes. And so I apologize. I had to stop the video for a second and help my daughter. So jumping back into what I was saying about appendices, these would include examples of things you might want to use an appendix for. Would be the complete copy of a survey or a questionnaire that you used, like literally the inventory that you used, that you handed out to the participants, or a detailed the instructional sheet that you gave to the participants, or that the um, instructor or researcher read to your participants, whatever instructions they had to follow. If you want to actually show what that looked like or what that was, you could put that in an appendix. If there's detailed information on complex equipment that you used, or an explanation of certain measurements that you used, that could be included in an appendix. So things like that. And then lastly, and then like informed consent forms or debriefing forms a lot of times appear in appendices as well. Almost forgot about that. So this last part here talks about 16.3, and that was what I was confusingly trying to show you a second ago. That is the APA format checklist. This is so nice to have when you are writing an APA style paper. Overall, these basic checklist things to make sure that you have all of these things in your paper the way that this says. And again, you can literally just go through and check them off. And it even breaks, so it has overall, but then it breaks it down by each section. The title page, what that should look like and what should be included. And again, for you to just go through and check them off. The abstract, the introduction, the method, the results, the discussion, the references, tables, figures, and appendices. Very cool. Now, you may also wonder how you would submit a research report, or also what is called a manuscript, for publication. The first step in that process is finding the right journal to publish it in. So if you're writing about some kind of educational technique or implementation or educational strategy, you wouldn't want to publish that in a journal on industrial organizational psychology or counseling psychology if it has nothing to do with counseling. If it's educational focused, then you want to look for journals that are about educational psychology or school psychology or things like that. Or even developmental psychology or child psychology, things like that. So finding the right journal, you have to do a little bit of homework for that. You can look on their websites, and they have a general list of or a description of what their journal, the types of things their journal publishes, and what they look for, and you can see other publications that have been published in that journal to kind of give you an idea if it would be something that would be appropriate for your research report. And then you have to consult their submission requirements. Sometimes it's sending something in print and mailing it. Sometimes it's just sending it electronically. There's certain requirements. There may be other things that they want you to include, descriptions of other things or forms you have to fill out instead of just the manuscript itself. APA.org has a link or a section, and it's in your book, the actual hyperlink for that, or the web address that shows you a general instructional list of how to go through the process of submitting a manuscript. You often will attach a cover letter to the journal editor with it, and instructions on how to do that and what that looks like is in the APA publication manual. But that is just to again, it's to the journal editor. It's explaining what you're submitting, and there's other things that may need to go into that as well, but again, that's in the publication manual. We won't get into that here. And then most submitted manuscripts are rejected. They put that in there to encourage you, that only the best of the best are published. And so I'm gonna need that pen back though, sweetie. And so not to be upset if you don't get published. It is a very rigorous process. And so there is also a manuscript checklist on the apa.org website, and that HTML address is in your chapter as well. There's also conference presentations, which is different than submitting a research report for publication. This is where you would go and present an oral presentation of your paper or a poster of your research. The oral presentation, usually 10 to 20 minutes. It usually is like some kind of PowerPoint presentation that summarizes your manuscript. It has a summary of, each of the parts of your manuscript in your study. A poster is kind of the same thing, except it's in poster form, and guidelines for that is usually provided by the organization that is doing the that is hosting the conference, and it's usually in a large, convention hall, conference hall type place. Think science fair sort of, where there's tables and posters and things set up, and for researchers to display their research for an hour or two, so that other researchers can walk around and look at them, ask questions, things like that. And then first I wanted to do the learning check for the end of this section really quickly, and then we will move on to 16.4 because that is really it. So if a research manuscript is printed in a journal, where does the running head appear? And when it's actually in a journal, it is going to be on every page of the manuscript, on every page of the journal article, again, so that they can identify that this information that's below this point goes with this article. That's part of the purpose of that running head. What is typically described in the results section of an APA style research report? Again, results section. So there's no interpretation, there's no implications. So it is literally just the descriptive and inferential statistics, just the statistics, just the facts. In APA style, where do page numbers appear? Hopefully you know this from seeing it, but also from me saying it. It's the upper right-hand corner of the page. And then going back to this, you can screenshot this. This is just a discussion activity to get you to think about precautions and things that you may want to take when writing something and publishing something, so that it will be received positively. Certain things that may need to be included, or certain ways that you may want to word things like that. So last section of the whole textbook, woohoo, is 16.4, where you're actually writing a research proposal, which you guys, again, already did. So hopefully you have seen this information prior to right now watching this video. But this is learning objective number 4, which is explaining the purpose of what a research proposal is and how it is different from a research report. And so this is addressing, a research proposal basically is addressing the first 6 steps ish of the research process that we've discussed. It is very, very similar to a research report, which we will talk about in a second. But why do we do the research proposal? Obviously sometimes it's assigned for a class like this, but oftentimes in the real world, or in once you are out of a classroom situation, it is to obtain funding for a research study. It may just simply help a research define their thinking, and get focused. And once they have that proposal, then they're able to reuse a lot of that information for their actual research report, because again, it's very similar, and so they will use a lot of that information for that. And then also obtain approval from a dissertation committee, or whatever, the IRB for the university if you're doing campus research, things like that. So what do you need to include in a research proposal? Hopefully you guys already know this from doing yours, but you're going to talk about what will be done in the study, what may possibly be found in the study, and how the planned study is related to other research. Again, that literature review and relating it back to previous research. So how do we write it? Again, APA guidelines are very similar. One of the main differences is that, as we talked about in the research report, you're using past tense most of the time because you're referring to research that has already been done. But since we're talking about a proposed idea here, most of it is going to be in the future tense, because you're describing something that hasn't happened yet. We're saying things that we would do or we will do or that we would like to do in the study. Some of the other differences is that are that an abstract is optional. You don't have to necessarily have an abstract for a research proposal. It can be good practice writing the abstract for it, but it's not necessary. The literature review in the introduction section is usually a lot longer, because you are trying to justify your research in order to get it approved or to get funding or whatever the case is. And so a lot of times this proposal has an approval process associated with it. And so you're wanting to support, with other research, the justification and again, support for your study as much as possible. And so it's usually more extensive. A lot of times when they go to the research report phase, they will pare that down, that literature review down somewhat. And then the results or discussion section, obviously you don't have results yet because it is a proposed study. And so a lot of times they will combine results and discussion, or it'll be labeled expected results. And that will just basically talk about how data will be collected and analyzed. So the statistics that will be used on the data, and what the expected results are, and any other plausible outcomes or implications that may happen from the results that you hope to obtain. Again, all very future tense because it hasn't happened yet. So, as far as the learning check goes for this one, oh, nope, I went too far. I went to the chapter summary. Spoiler alert, we're almost done. So which of the following accurately describes a research proposal? Obviously, it's not written after the data has been collected, and it is not, it does include previous research, so that third one's not it. And it's not, the results section is not going to be the same because you don't have data. So obviously the answer is that it helps researchers refine their thinking. And that's just one of the purposes, obviously. Which of the following is optional for a research proposal? And as we just talked about, the abstract is the part that's optional. The introduction and method section and discussion section are not optional. You have to have that literature review and introduce your idea and your hypotheses and all of that. You have to talk about your methods and the procedure and what you're going to do in your study when you're talking about a proposal. And the discussion section, again, is simply talking about what results you hope to find and what you would do with them. So that is it for chapter 16. Just to review, what is the goal of a research report? That was in 16.1, where we talked about you want to include what was done, what was found, and how that's related to past research. The goal is to be able to make it public so that other researchers can use that information to further, more knowledge, more research, all of that. And then the second section, 16.2, we talked about what are the general guidelines for writing an APA style, that it should be objective, that it should be simple and concise, not a lot of extra words, not a lot of fluff, very fact-based, and written in a very clear and organized way so that readers can understand your research. And then in 16.3, we talked about the elements of a research report at the beginning of this video. We talked about the different sections, which were the title page, the abstract, the introduction, the method, the results, and the discussion section, and then the references page, and then figures or table pages and the appendices. Um, and then we just talked about the elements of a research proposal for 16.4, which again is very similar to the research report, except for the tense, the optional abstract, the literature review being more extensive, and then, of course, the expected results instead of actual results. So here are your 4 learning objectives for this chapter that hopefully you feel like you've got a handle on at this point. And you are done with, I don't know why it says 1 of 2, it's just 1 of 1. You are done with chapter 16. You are done with this textbook. I applaud you guys for sticking with this book and this class and all of these videos, and I hope that they have helped you. And again, if you guys have any questions this last week of the term, just email me and I will be more than happy to help any way I can.